But I want to switch the topic to a different form of racism for our next one. This article from The Federalist. Black Lives Matter is threatening an uprising against racist vaccine mandates. Now, of course, we reference the CDC for all of the information on vaccines. I'm not making any commentary on the effectiveness of vaccines. You should contact your medical professional. I am not a doctor. Don't listen to a word I have to say. Contact the CDC, talk to your doctor, all that good stuff. But, I've been thinking for the past couple weeks about the fact that all last summer and last fall, leading up to the election, racism was deemed a public health crisis. Who remembers that? Who remembers the fact that basically all throughout 2020, racism was declared to be a public health crisis? It was all over the media. They talked about it all the time. City councils passed resolutions. Racism was a public health crisis. That was why the Black Lives Matter protests were allowed to be so big in the middle of a pandemic. Racism was such an important public health crisis that it actually usurped the public health crisis that we legitimately had at that time, which was a literal pandemic. Racism was more important than a literal pandemic. I bring this up because has anyone heard any talk from the media about how racism is a public health crisis lately? Because I haven't. What does that mean? Did we solve racism? Racism was so important last year, and it has completely disappeared from the conversation this year. Racism is no longer a public health crisis. Congratulations, everyone. We solved racism. We did it. Racism is not a public health crisis anymore. It has been usurped by the unvaccinated as a public health crisis. Now, it's interesting, though, that Black Lives Matter noticed this, wasn't it? It's interesting that Black Lives Matter has decided that vaccine mandates are a public health crisis. And I'm just going to say this right now. If YouTube demonetizes this or gives me some stupid bullshit strike in any way for talking about this article, I just think that's a little bit racist, YouTube. I just think that's a little bit racist. Let's read. Let's read about what Black Lives Matter is doing. It's a rule in the national media that vaccine hesitancy is worthy of shame, scorn, right up until it collides with their most precious cause, the Black Lives Matter movement. Hesitant white nurses? Outcast. Hesitant white Facebook moms? Shun. Hesitant white Trump supporters? Guillotine. But there's oddly been no prescription for the Black Lives Matter crew in New York who are accusing the city of racial discrimination by mandating vaccines for public indoor activity. Hank Newsom, co-founder and chairman of Black Lives Matter Greater New York, was quoted in Saturday's New York Times saying that restaurants are using vaccine mandates to enforce their racist beliefs and excluding Black patrons. Well, we don't want that. We had just cured racism, guys. We had just cured racism. Racism was no longer a public health crisis, and then Bill de Blasio in New York City brings racism back as a public health crisis. God, these white liberals, they always screw everything up. Just when we had solved racism, Bill de Blasio brought racism back. At a protest Monday in front of New York restaurants Carmine's, Newsom, also a co-founder of the group, said of vaccine mandates, what is going to stop the Gestapo, I mean the NYPD, from rounding up Black people, from snatching them off the train, off the bus? Do you guys remember after the election? I think it was after the election. I went on a whole tear for like a couple of months where I was like, I basically said like Black Lives Matter as a populist movement has more in common with MAGA as a populist movement than they think. And there might actually be good overlap between like the populist wings of both sides to come together and work together and find some common ground. It's like the Rainbow Coalition, man. This has all happened before. And here we are again, history repeating itself right in front of us. She further issued the threat that BLM was putting the city on notice that your mandate will not be another racist social distance practice and that Black people are not going to stand by or you will see another uprising. She said vaccine verification is not a free passport to racism. The catalyst for those remarks was an incident in Carmine's last week wherein three Black women from Texas were charged for assaulting a hostess at the restaurant, allegedly over a vaccine verification dispute. And as a lawyer for the woman subsequently claimed, because the hostess is of Asian descent and used a racial slur. Now, we all know in the woke hierarchy of oppression, Black people are always at the top of the hierarchy. Asians are typically down towards the bottom. Every once in a while, Asians get elevated, but Asians never, ever, 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 ever are elevated above Black people in the woke oppression hierarchy. A lawyer representing Carmine's has disputed the allegation about a racial slur. Video footage of the incident includes no audio, but what can be seen is that three women were being led inside the restaurant by a member of the staff who is not the hostess. Once inside, the hostess is seen exiting to return to her post when all three customers turn to follow her back outside. One of them approaches the hostess from behind and begins speaking as the others circled. A fight ensues. Lawyers for both sides agree, though the dispute was not over the vaccination status of the three women, but over additional members of the party, several men who did not have vaccine cards. The details are kind of beside the point, though. Black residents make up a higher rate of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths in New York City than white residents. They're also vaccinated at a lower rate, with 45% of New York City's adult Black population having been fully vaccinated versus 56% of white adults. Wasn't it Ibram X. Kendi that said that racism is like the cause for any racial disparities? Seems to me that New York City and Bill de Blasio is being a little bit racist. I'm just saying. It's okay, Bill. We're all a little bit racist sometimes. It's just the way the cookie crumbles. I don't care if anyone, regardless of race, chooses not to receive a vaccine against COVID. That's their dice to roll. Check the CDC. I'm just reading the article, YouTube. But imagine a white Trump supporter saying his right to dine indoors among strangers shall not be infringed. Let's see. Dr. Lena Wen would be on CNN for 24 hours straight, assuring us that there is no constitutional entitlement to Restaurant Week. But because we're talking about Black Lives Matter, which can do no wrong in the media's eyes, suddenly vaccine mandates aren't so pressing an issue. Suddenly, groups of people with specific demographic raging against the mandates aren't so worthy of ridicule. Remember that the next time a mousy CNN correspondent does one of those ungodly long statements on harm to public health caused by vaccine hesitancy in rural communities, Trump supporters, this isn't about public health, it's about politics. Just when we thought we cured racism, the woke left brought it back.